Hey, thank you all so much for being here. As Harold said, thank you very much for braving the storm here, Tropical Storm Nicole. I'm Matthew Wells. I'm the research director here at the Elling Eide Center. On behalf of the staff, I want to welcome everyone to the Elling Eide Research Library and Preserve. Our public lectures highlight areas that were of scholarly and personal interest to Mr. Elling Eide. These areas include the languages, literatures, and cultures of East Asia, as well as the diverse cultures of Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. The horticulture, ecology, and natural environment of Little Sarasota Bay and Florida more generally, and the cultures and languages of the indigenous peoples of the American Southeast. Today, we are very happy to welcome Professor Knapp to the Eide Center. Dr. Knapp received his PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley in 1996, where he specialized in the history and culture of early medieval China, a period of Chinese history roughly spanning about 200 to 600 CE. He is currently professor of history at the Citadel, the military college of South Carolina, where he is the department's specialist in East Asia. The impressive scope of his teaching includes courses on the leadership on the history of East Asia, the samurai in literature and art, East Asian concepts of leadership, Chinese utopian thought, violence and warfare in Chinese history, the Silk Road, archaeology, historiography, and I believe a new course entitled The Good Life and Death in Chinese History. He has also served his department as Director of Graduate Studies, the department chairperson, and Wes Bako, Professor of National Security Studies. Over his long career, Dr. Knapp's research has continued to focus on the early medieval period, particularly on the moral and religious values that people of that time used to navigate and to understand their world. His numerous publications reveal a broad range of scholarly interests, including filial children and expressions of filial piety, familial relationships, the formulation and practice of Confucian ideas, historiography, cannibalism, the supernatural world, and more recently, how animals were understood and represented in medieval Chinese culture, literature, and art. In addition to his prodigious scholarship, I should also mention that Dr. Knapp played a key role in the advancement of the fields of early Chinese studies and early medieval studies, in addition to organizing and attending panels at innumerable conferences around the world. Dr. Knapp is the co-editor of Early Medieval Chinese Texts, a bibliographic guide, and together with Al Dean is the editor of the Cambridge History of China, Volume 2, The Six Dynasties. Scholars and students of the period waited a long time for this critical volume in the Cambridge History of China series, and it was finally completed under Dr. Knapp's leadership. He has also served as the president of the Early Medieval China Group, the largest scholarly association in the Western world for early medieval studies from 2010 to 2020. And was a founding member of the Southeast Early China Roundtable, a conference being held here this weekend at the Eide Center that brings together scholars of early China from all disciplines from the Southeast United States. And I should mention that this is the Roundtable's 26th year. Dr. Knapp's lecture today, entitled The Meaning of Birds on Spirit Jars, Hunping, will discuss the figurines of birds that adorn decorated jars excavated from tombs across Southeastern China. Would you please help me give a very warm welcome to the Eide Center's final speaker of 2022, Dr. Knapp.
All right, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Harold. It's great to be back down here. It's great to talk to you. I picked this talk about birds because knowing that the Eide Center is also a preserve with lots of birds, it seemed like this was a very appropriate subject to talk to you about. I am so happy you're here that you braved the elements. I swear I did not bring this weather from South Carolina. I think it's on its way there. And hopefully you're going to enjoy these interesting and weird jars the way that I have, and try to figure out why there are so many birds on these things. All right, so let's see if I can go here. And okay, so one of the most captivating and fascinating artifacts found in China have to be these things, which are called Hunping. They're pottery jars. Usually they're celadon. They have 5 mouths with 4 smaller ones on each side, and then 1 bigger spout in the middle. And what makes these so interesting is that they often have ceramic figurines all around them. And you'll see that these are just early ones. they get much more elaborate. All right, and so they have animals, peoples, and whoops, sorry about that, are really highly decorated. And even more remarkable is the fact that even though more than 200 have been excavated, no two are exactly alike, right? So they're highly unique. They have no practical use. 5 mouths, I mean, it's going to be hard to control whatever liquid's in there. And they were strictly used as a great good. And finally, they only were in use for 200 years. And you can see I have put out there on the whiteboard the periods that we find these. And they're also in just a very constricted area, which is Southeast China, mostly in the provinces, the modern provinces of Jiangsu and Zhejiang. So it's sort of a time-limited artifact. So this sort of artifact is really important because it tells us a lot about that specific time and place and the ideas that went around, that went into creating them. And they're also, in addition to there being physically distinct, they are also mysterious. We don't know what they were called. There's no contemporary discussion of these jars. And so all our information about them comes through archaeology and a lot of guesswork. All right. So we don't even know what their proper name is. And so scholars over the years have given them all sorts of different names. And these names usually are just descriptive or they're guesswork about what they were supposed to be labeled. And so one is, in the earliest type of these vessels is usually called a 5-link jar, that there are 5 spouts or a 5-pitcher bottle, a figured vessel, a vessel that has figurines on it. Some scholars think that these were granaries, and so they're called granary vessels. Japanese scholars often call them shinteiko, spirit pavilion jars. And the most common way of calling them is Hunping, which is what I'll call them just for convenience sake. My mentor, Albert Dean, notes that there's one jar that actually has a Chinese character on it, and that's Ling, which means numinous or efficacious, spiritually efficacious. And so he thinks that probably these are, that was their name, at least in the Eastern Han, but one character on one jar, yeah, it's not very clear. Okay, so there's boundless number of theories about these things. And for many scholars, they think that these things were the abode of the spirits in the tomb. And before we talk about the spirit or the soul, we have to realize that in China, they conceived people as having multiple souls. And one of the most important of these souls, is the Hun, which is called the cloudy soul. And that's thought that at death, the soul might lift up and go to the heavens. That's the traditional explanation. And that your poor soul will remain in the tomb. And these souls also can wander outside of you while you're living. And if all of a sudden you're not making any sense, it means your Hun soul is wandering out and doing something. There's a famous vernacular novel, or maybe it's a play, where there's a scholar who goes off and he can't take his beauty with him and he hasn't betrothed her yet. And so her Hun soul goes up and meets him in the capital. And meanwhile, back home, her body is just sort of, it's like she's sick, right? Because the Hun is also connected with sort of mental capacity. So you have multiple souls, all right? And so the usual explanation is that in this container, the Hun, the soul that goes up to the heavens, this was a receptacle for it. And the 5 jars the five spouts are often interpreted as the five holy Chinese mountains, right? And of course, five is a really important term. Chinese, when they look at directions, pre-modern Chinese, there's five directions. That goes against what we think, right? But the center is a direction too. And actually, that's the most important direction because it connects all of the others. All right, so that these have five spouts directly connects with this idea of the numinous five. All right. Okay. So, and Chinese had this belief that, yeah, there are microcosms all around you that you can slip into. There's a famous story about a Taoist master who sells stuff in the market in the morning, and he sells enough stuff, and then he has a gourd that's hanging from his stall, and at night he pops into it and lives in it. And somebody observes this and says to him, "Oh, what's this all about?" And he takes him, and there's a whole world within the gourd. And so this is the idea for many of these scholars, is that, yeah, your Hun soul after death will enter into this jar and it will be paradise. All right. Okay. Some other scholars believe that these five jars, these five spouts actually are the five islands of the immortals. Again, this is a way to transport yourself to paradise. Okay. All right. So others will say that these jars actually, let me just push ahead one. All right. That these jars are actually composed of three parts. One being Huangquan, the yellow springs, sort of the afterlife place you don't want to go to. You can get punished or you do labor all the time. It's not very cheery. And that this is the earth, and then the top part where all the birds are flocking to are the heavens. All right, and so that actually these jars represent the cosmos, with this part being the earth, this part being the human realm, and then this part being the realm of the spirits. And so basically, you go in the jar, and then you rise up to the top, and you're in the heaven. All right. Other scholars disagree, and others think that this is actually a Buddhist paradise. I'm doing. Oh, you can see down here. These are Buddhas, and if we go here are Buddhas as well. And so these scholars think that, oh yeah, these are the five sacred. It's the four sacred directions of Buddhism. In the middle is a stupa, a reliquary, or it's Mount Sumeru, the sort of tree of life of Buddhism. All right, so that's another explanation. Meanwhile, an old classmate of mine from Berkeley, Stan Abe, says, yeah, no, these things weren't meant to house the Hun soul. Actually, they're basically for the living and to bless the living, rather than have anything to do with the dead. So we'll keep that in mind. All right. But no matter what ideas there are, one of the most remarkable things about these jars is they're loaded with animals. And students of the Hunping often talk about that. Oh yeah, there's a lot of animals, and then they just leave it aside. And so what has generated my talk is really, why are there so many animals? And after looking at the jars closely, it's like, why are there so many birds? And the birds last throughout the entire time that I have up there, whereas other animals disappear. And so what made birds so important that they had to be on the jar? And why did there have to be so many? We'll see that one jar has 66 birds, right? And it's just like, why so many? But actually, most scholars are more interested in why are there so many Buddhas, because this is a very early appearance of an image of the Buddha. Did the presence of animals on these vessels change over time? And I'll say, yeah, that animals are much more prominent earlier on in the Eastern Han, right there, and in the Wu state. That second thing on the whiteboard, that up until 280. And then after that, they disappear largely from the spirit jars, except for the birds and bears. All right. And I'll also talk about the location of the animals on the jar and all that sort of stuff. And even though most scholars believe the birds on the spirit jars represent the Hun soul of the deceased, I think it's actually much more likely they depict the local Southeastern belief that birds are responsible for rice farming. Hence, their presence is meant to bring good luck to both the living and the dead. In other words, the jars manifest Jiangnan local religious beliefs, so south of the Jiang River, the Yangtze River, in which birds are particularly significant. All right, so before I get on though with talking about that, I'm going to do a quick overview of the development of these jars. All right, and so here you see the 5 link jars, and these two are Eastern Han jars, and you can see that there's no figurines at all, but it's very clear that they have this 5-jar aspect. And in the Wu state, they start to add some figurines. And so here we can see the five spouts, but we start to see these things, which scholars usually identify as bears, although Albert Dean thinks they might be rats, and we'll get back to rats. Rats are very important. All right. And so, and during the Wu state, we start to see more and more of these figurines on these jars. And here's some more of these bears/rats. And but you know, you have the continuing presence of the 5 spouts. This one is there's actually a couple of these that are very similar, but this is particularly interesting in that it's a mother. And we're going to talk about how I think these jars are also connected with fertility, so that actually makes a lot of sense that it would be a mother. Okay. All right, and here's some more. This is actually thought to be a funerary scene, and that is a coffin. And so some scholars think that what you have on the jars, so the figurines are engaged in a funeral. And oftentimes there are musicians, which was always something that was necessary at a funeral. Okay. All right. But what happens during the Wu state period after 250 is all of a sudden the artisans start to put in this sort of plate, a platform that divides the lower part from the upper. And this makes it so there's even no pretense that you're going to pour anything out of here. And so the 5 spouts, here you can still see that there are spouts, and these sort of retain the older function. They start to introduce architectural elements, but they still have the 5 spouts. And as we go on, pretty soon the spouts disappear. Those 4 spouts that are on each side become towers. And the central spout becomes a huge architectural structure, right? And so, and you can see here are the 4 towers. These are the 4 spouts that have now become architectural elements. And then you see the big house, right? And so this is one of the really interesting things of how these things change over time. All right, and what having this platform did was important for in three ways. First, it made it so the viewer would no longer view the vessel as a whole, but gaze at its distinct sections. All All right, and of course, I just talked about how it made it so that you could transform these jar mouths into buildings. Okay, and so this is what I would call a mature form of the spirit jar. All right. Okay. If we look at dated example of these jars, the earliest one dates from 103 CE, while the latest one comes from 322. And so for some reason at 317, when the Western Jin falls and you start to have, and they fall because pastoral nomads have occupied North China, and there's a migration of Chinese who are living there down to the south, to Nanjing, which becomes the capital. All of a sudden, with the influx of all these northerners, this jar disappears, and this and sort of funerary culture, which is very, very conservative, seems to be affected almost immediately by this. All right, and most of these jars come from two places. And I'm sorry, this is actually from a Japanese article, but this shows you all the places where they've been found. This is southern Jiangsu, and this is northern Zhejiang province. And you can see that most of the examples are from these two places. Fujian down here has a few. Anhui and Jiangxi have a few too, but it's highly concentrated in this area of southern Jiangsu and northern Zhejiang. And it seems to have had its origins in northern Zhejiang. And Nanjing started to create them a little bit later on. So this is really the area. So modern Shanghai is up here, right? So this is the area that we're talking about. All right. And the jars are found in larger, richer tombs that belong to members of the local magnate families, right? These were rich guys who had a lot of power. And this is the type of tomb that creates these things. And as we've seen, these jars are not some product of mass production, right? They seem to be individually crafted. So they must have been a very expensive item. It's not like you went to your local spirit jar shop and said, oh, you don't take a half dozen of those. No. All right. And no matter how many coffins are within the tombs, there's just one jar. So if it's the idea that, the dead are going to inhabit it, oh, I guess everybody's got to crowd into that one spirit jar. So again, that doesn't quite seem to gel with the idea that these things are for the spirits to inhabit. Okay, so now let's talk about animals on the Hunping. And animals on these things can be divided into two categories. There's natural ones, and then there's supernatural ones. We're not going to talk about the supernatural ones. That's a whole different kettle of fish. And instead, we're going to talk about natural animals. And these are some of the supernatural animals that are found. Here's a Buddha, actually, and these are supernatural signs. This is the two birds that share a common heart. All right. All right, the first animals that appear on Eastern Hunping, let's see if I can, are going to be fish, lizards, dogs, silkworms, lions, and bears. We can see that actually these things really are teeming with animals. What's really interesting in this part, which is supposed to be like the yellow springs, we see all sorts of aquatic animals, right? These are, this is a type of turtle. Here you can see the worms, and there's holes, and they seem to be either moving towards them or coming out of the holes, which makes scholars think it's the yellow springs. And you can see that there's domestic animals, there's going to be wild animals, and you can see all the different types of birds. Here again is that bear/rat. Oftentimes the bear is feeding itself. It's got some sort of morsel in its hand. And this is thought to be an auspicious sign, right? Because yeah, this bear is not about to tear you apart. It's already got its own food, so it's pretty happy. Okay. Okay. All right, so auspicious animals appear both below the horizontal platform and above it. By the Western Jin, reptiles and aquatic animals on the walls of the main pot were gradually replaced by auspicious creatures and horse riders. So the Wu, the period, that 3rd century period that you see in the middle there, was the place where you see the most of these animals. And by the Western Jin, actually they're disappearing. And the animals that are largely there left are birds and bears. All right. And the poor bears are often transformed into the pillars that are supporting the architectural structures. And actually that had a long history of bears being the supports for different jars because of their great strength. All right. And with the Western Jin things, and here's, I like to call this the animal parade, where you have all these animals trotting one after the other. You can see here's like a pelican, it might be a deer, that's a goat. There's some riddle behind this, which I am going to solve in a separate paper. I haven't figured out the animal parade yet, but I am going to get down to figuring it out. So what happens is, in the Western Jin, you start to have, here are more animals. And you start to have Buddhas that appear. Here we go. So you start to have the Buddhas sort of replace the animals. And some of these, there's one of these spirit jars that have 20 Buddha figures. And also supernatural animals appear in increasing number. And so what I think happens is during the Western Jin, there's a lot more influence of Buddhism, and so that the sort of the animal element gradually loses its interest. Okay, so let's talk about birds. So without a doubt, the most common spirit jar animal, natural or supernatural, are birds, which are either shown flying up to this to the top of the jar or perched on the edge of each of the 5 jar mouths peering inside, or they sit on the eaves of the buildings looking outwards. Although Aldine points out that the birds do not appear on the earliest spirit jars, they soon become a notable presence on nearly all subsequent jars. Indeed, if a jar only has one kind of animal, it will be a bird. Another noteworthy characteristic of these birds is that birds are the most numerous animals on the jars, and many Hunping have them in abundance. One Wu Kingdom jar has 66, and a Western Jin jar has 58 of these birds. Okay. So why are there so many birds on these jars? What are they meant to signify? Scholars have put forth a number of reasons for the appearance on jars. Many specialists think that since since birds are equally at home on the ground and in the skies, they appear on the jars to enable the Hun soul to rise up to heaven. A Japanese scholar, Kominami, for example, has argued that the birds are the departed Hun souls. Actually, they're actually the souls of the dead flying up to the heavens. And he notes that anecdotes from this period indicate that before it became an ancestor, the soul of the dead sometimes became a bird. To buttress this assertion, he relates a tale found in the 5th century history, the history of the later Han, about a guy named Yang Zhen, who was wrongfully driven to suicide. When the newly installed emperor reburied Yang with honor, a large bird came before the coffin, mourned grievously, and soaked the ground with its tears. Once the funeral was completed, it left. Kominami believes this bird was obviously Yang Zhen's Hun soul. Hence, the birds attached to the Hunping represent the soul of the departed as it attempts to enter the spirit jar's body, which is the abode of the ancestors. This is why the birds are always facing the jar and usually perched on the jar mouth, so just about to go in. He notes that the latest jars have birds who are looking outwards. Another scholar, Joe May, believes that people of the ancient Southeast China had a natural admiration for birds, which are overwhelmingly benign, have beautiful feathers, sing delightful songs, and like humans, get up with the rising sun and rest as it sets. And when slash and burn agriculture was in practice, birds were also cherished because they fertilized agricultural land with their droppings, which is why Jiangnan sometimes had what was called bird fields, Miaotian. Hence, the many birds on the Hunping reflect local admiration of birds and the belief that their help was needed to ascend to the heavens. And I think he gets it more right than Kominami. Another Chinese scholar underscores that beginning in the Neolithic period, this region had a long venerated birds and viewed them as supernatural beings. I'm jumping ahead, I'm sorry. Since the top part of the vessel symbolized heavenly world while the main jar is a temporary abode of the dead, the birds who fly up to perch on the jar's top are helpers who assist the Hun to ascend to paradise. Okay, so there's all sorts of these sort of explanations. And then there's the one scholar who sees them as Buddhist jars. And he thinks that there's so many birds because the Buddhists prize pigeons, which Persians used to deliver messages over long distances. So these were actually pigeons, which would strike Americans as a very sort of pigeons are not lucky, right? All right, and he also notes that in some of the Buddha's birth stories, Buddha becomes a pigeon. Hence, birds are symbolic of Buddhism. All of these explanations are intriguing and suggestive, but to what degree do they actually explain why there are so many? If the birds are the Hun soul of the deceased, why are there more than one? Yeah, and Kominami is right that there are these stories about somebody dying wrongfully and then their soul taking the shape of a bird. That is definitely without dispute. Nevertheless, in these stories, the Hun only becomes one bird. It doesn't become multiple birds, which really doesn't make much sense. This is from a sarcophagus, a 5th century sarcophagus that's lacquered, that's up in Ningxia, way in the northwest. And it relates the story of the filial son Guoqi. His stepmother cast doubt on Guoqi's virtue, saying that he molested her, and tells his father, and his father orders him to commit suicide. He commits suicide, he drowns himself in a river. His father then realizes that his wife, his second wife, has led him astray, and he goes out in search of Guoqi, and he comes to the river, and a ferryman tells him, "No, your son has drowned himself." And all of a sudden, there's a bird flittering around and will not stop pestering Guoqi's dad. And Guoqi's dad realizes, "Oh my God, this is Guoqi. If you're Guoqi, please enter my sleeve and come out the center of my road." And the bird does exactly that. And he knows that this is his son Guoqi, who has been transformed into a bird soul. And so here we see Guoqi's dad riding back to his home, and he's got Guoqi the bird on his shoulder. Now this has a happy ending and a not so happy ending. They go back, his wife sees this bird, his second wife, and says, "Oh my God, that's an inauspicious bird. Go get your bow and arrow and shoot it." The father goes, gets a bow and arrow, and he shoots his wife. And then Guoqi the bird goes and pecks her eyes out. I love those stories. Okay. But again, it's just one bird. It's not multiple birds, right? And this hypothesis about, oh yeah, this is where the Hun soul hangs out. makes absolutely no sense, right? Because if we look at other artifacts from the same time, this is a candlestick. It's got birds, right? Actually, each one of these folk had a bird on it. And here you can see the remainder. So it's got the same theme, but it's a candlestick. I don't think the dead is supposed to go into the candlestick. That makes no sense at all. And here is this is a model stove. And again, we can see all the birds, right? And we can see the architectural structure. Here's the architectural structure, just like you see on the spirit chart, with all these birds. And yeah, no, I don't think the spirit is supposed to go in the middle of an oven. Yeah, unless it's going to a different place in the heavens, right? So yeah, that makes no sense at all. All right. So that explanation really doesn't make sense. So let's go and try to figure out what does make sense. And it might be really useful to look at local traditions about birds in southern Jiangsu and in Zhejiang. And what we find is both these regions have myths about the instrumental role that birds played in the introduction of rice agriculture. As a result, birds are held in high esteem and are frequently the recipients of rituals that express gratitude. In the Jiangnan area, this admiration for birds has a long history. It's already evident in the archaeological remains of both Homodu and the Neolithic, these are Neolithic cultures, Homodu and the Liangju cultures. All right, and oops, I think okay, so this is from Homodu. This is 7,000 years old. All right, so really far back. And you can see that it's hard to see, but these are two birds. And this is probably the sun. And of course, here again, we have, actually, no, I don't think this is a letter opener. I can't remember what archaeologists think it is, but you can see, yeah, again, it's a bird. And if we go to the, and any art historians out there, I'm sorry. I can't remember that. It's not a letter opener. Okay, and these are from Liangju, and you can see again there's this veneration of birds. All right, so in various places in Zhejiang, this is a bronze from the same areas from the Warren Estates. In various places in Zhejiang province, scholars have collected different versions of a legend in which sparrows play a key role in introducing rice agriculture. Although the details differ, the broad parameters of the legend remain the same. Soon after humans were created, they were starving because they didn't have any food. Rice was the food of the gods that could only be found in the heavens, and people had no access to them. Aware of the humans' dire situation and taking pity on them, sparrows flew up to the heavens to obtain or to steal the rice, which they brought down to earth. In some versions, they have helpers, and those are the rats. Rats help complete the job by distributing the seeds. As a result, the native of these areas regarded sparrows as grain deities and honored them with sacrifices of rice. Until the 1950s, some villages would stage a festival in their honor in the second month of the 19th day. Each family would cook up a dish of rice with vegetables, which was called Baijiafan, the rice of the 100 families or the rice of the 100 birds, and would then scatter it on rooftops or fields to feed the birds. The purpose of doing this was to thank the birds for bringing grain into this world. Aldine observes that many of the earliest decorating Hunping have animals that are often identified as bears, but look more like rats. Perhaps the figures are the divine rats of legend who helped the swallows distribute the grain. There's there we have these things that look more like rats and bears. And if we look here, this is a Wu Kingdom Hunping, and this thing looks like very much like a rat who's climbing up to help everybody. These, I think, are bears. I love this one. This is just a particularly interesting one. Okay. Okay, since the residents of Jiangnan viewed sparrows as grain gods, they're also associated with human fertility. Jiangnan people often called swallows ma zhang biao. I think I can go back. And these are called ma zhang in the Wu dialect. In Wu dialect, it's ma zhang biao. And in this case, niao is pronounced as diao, which is the same word that's used for the male penis, or the penis, right? There's no female penis, all right. In other words, the birds were called swallow penises. In some areas of Zhejiang, there was a ritual in which a childless married couple on the night of the second month, 19th day, which would be the celebration day of the sparrows, would first pray before altar to the god who delivers spring, which is a sparrow god. And the husband would go out and secure a male sparrow. After cooking it, the couple would kowtow and pray before the altar. Only then would the husband consume the sparrow. The Tang Dynasty doctor, Chen Zanqi, in his supplement to Material Medica, notes that, quote, if in the second month of winter you eat it, sparrows, it will make the penis rise, which will allow the birth of children. Clearly, this proves that sparrows were associated with fertility as early as the Tang Dynasty. But how far back do these local beliefs about sparrows bestowing rice to humans go back? All right, so actually we're going to jump away from China and quickly to go to Japan. And so, of course, during this same period of time, there's all sorts of connections between southern China and Korea and Japan. And this summer, together with a Japanese archaeologist, I did a talk on the introduction of these 5-spouted jars to both Korea and Japan. So this is from Western Japan on the Sea of the Japan side. And they too started to have these 5-spouted jars. And very interesting, you know, and oftentimes they have birds on them. And okay, why do they have birds on them? Well, it turns out that during the Yayoi period, 1000 BC to about 300, we know from these pots that have engravings on them that the Yayoi people had this belief in birdmen, feathered men, and from the earliest Japanese books, which are in the 8th century, they say that yeah, there was a custom that that on a certain month, men dressed in feathers and bird clothes would go out to welcome the grain god, which was probably a bird coming from the ocean, who would bring grain. And so here we can see this guy is wearing feathers. And this is a modern reproduction of probably what this is picturing. And they would also go out to the ocean, and you can see these guys are wearing feathered hats. And so oddly enough, we start getting a confirmation that that as rice was taken and introduced to Korea and to Japan from South China, that along with that technology also went this idea that, yeah, it was the birds who brought the grains down from the heavens. So not suspecting that these Japanese things would shed any light on this, you know, I was happily proved incorrect. Okay. Okay, there's also, going back to China, there's also this idea of bird fields. What is a bird field? Han text mentioned that Jiangnan had bird fields. This seems to refer to the fact that in the early period when slash and burn agriculture was prevalent, people relied on birds to broadcast seeds onto the fields and to eat pests. The first century text, the Yue Jue Shu, tells us that the coastal people of Dayue, who is in the Shaoxing region, which is in the northern Zhejiang, are unique in their development of bird fields. Since the sage king Yu did not have a way to repay the people for their hard work, he taught people to have bird fields, end quote. One could also translate this last passage as he taught people how to bird the fields. In other words, you taught people how to make use of the ground inadvertently prepared for agriculture through natural activities of birds and how to actively use birds to aid in rice farming. We have this great quote from the skeptic Wang Chong, where he says, yeah, this is a bunch of nonsense, right? And it's all just unintentional. And he was actually from Shaoxing. The nature of heaven and earth finds expression in the doings of birds and beasts. Elephants stamp the ground on their own accord, and so birds pick out plants. When the earth has thus been pounded and the weeds destroyed, it looks like a tilled field. And when the soil has been loosened and the clods have been turned, man can forthwith proceed to plant. Here, Wang says that the birds inadvertently help farmers by eating the remains of full crops. Taking the time and energy to refute this belief in 2 places of his work, Wang nevertheless underscores how much people of Jiangnan associated birds with agriculture. Okay, and I don't know if this is going to work, but I was hoping to show you a video. But yeah,
Can I help you?
Yeah, can you help
So
me?
you should be able to just.
I want to do the ducks in Thailand.
Figure this out, guys. Sorry, everybody. Give me 1 second. I just need some mind space here for you. All right, you should just be.
Not that one, the one below.
You want the one below?
Yeah. Because this is also Southeast Asia.
It should open it into a new window, but this is what we're going to do. Apologies.
Yeah, and don't worry if you can't get it to work.
Trying to copy the link and open it in a. Do you actually have the YouTube link? Because you can just show it right here real quick. I can actually take you to YouTube.
Oh, that was the YouTube link, right?
Would that work? Yeah, I can't copy it from my.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
You sure?
Yeah, I'll just tell it like that. All right, so basically in Japan and in Southeast Asia, it's now common to use ducks to get rid of pests and weeds in your fields. This Taiwan is especially funny because, I mean, there's a lot of these birds and they show them, you know, that they blow the whistle for the end of the day and they all just run up into the truck. Quite humorous, but yeah, so it's usually young ducks. And what they do is they'll eat the pests on the plants and they'll also eat, they'll eat weeds, but they will not touch the actual rice plants. And farmers have found this is a great way to not use pesticide and to get rid of these things. And they found that actually these fields do much better with birds doing that than if they use chemical fertilizers. Also, you have to use the birds when they're young because if they get too big, then they sort of squash the rice plants. And actually, the guys who are farming ducks were really happy because they have months that they don't have to feed these ducks because the ducks go feed themselves. So anyway, so that's the idea. So they had a positive association of birds and saw them as an ally in cultivation. And so again, this makes birds a really auspicious animal. Not only are they auspicious because they bring the grains from heaven, but also because they just help you till the fields. So it's my belief that the motif of multiple birds on spirit jars has nothing to do with guiding the Hun to the heavens. For the residents of Jiangnan, the image of birds flying up and resting on the lips of jars, which might contain grain, reminded them of their belief that birds delivered grains to the earth by bringing it from the sky. And the idea of many birds bringing grain from the sky to earth also indicates agricultural abundance. Since sparrows were associated with fertility, the many birds also conveyed the idea of human fertility as well. In other words, for Jiangnan people, the image of numerous birds was a sign of good fortune, the abundance of both rice and children. What could be better? This is a reason why we find this motif on other objects, such as candlesticks and model stoves. All right, and then just one last bit is that on a limited number of these things, we actually find some writing. I have one of these things here, produced in Schöning. May there continue to be sons and grandsons, hold offices which are high, and have promotions that are multitudinous without limit. Right, and they all say these other things, right? That hope, this jar guarantees that you're going to have lots of sons and they're going to rise up to high positions in the government, right? And it actually doesn't say anything about the dead. So it seems to be benefiting the living. So again, these are more auspicious signs rather than being anything about the fortune of the dead. All right, so that brings me to my conclusion, which is that, and I think I made it pretty evident of why I see why the birds there are so many. But I think the important thing too is to remember that these change over time, right? And that actually all these animals, by the blue state, they disappear. And so, and the Western gin jars are actually pretty different because they have more auspicious bees and Buddhas. So by looking at this artifact, we can see this one region. Their ideas about the dead and the afterlife are changing a little bit. So that's one important thing. We also see that since the jars are spatially limited, we also see that, these people in the Southeast have very different ideas. And we can see that they're very close to animals, and animals meant a whole lot to them. And birds were of the most important because they were so auspicious. I really think that these jars have a lot more to offer us. And so I'll keep pushing on, especially about animals. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed the talk. And I'm sorry I couldn't show you all those birds going up into the truck because that's quite a sight. All right, so thank you for your patience. I really appreciate it.
We have some time for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
There are turtles at the bottom of all of this. Really there?
Yeah. And actually in China, that's long-standing that stele are put into the back of the tortoise. I'm not really sure. It could be that the tortoises are such great age and you want the stele to also be, and of course you put it into stone so it will last forever. And I guess tortoises are used for that purpose too. But that's a good question because I never really gave that much thought. Yeah, go ahead.
How large are these?
Some of them are quite high. Let's say they're close to 3 feet. And I think they're some of the earlier ones are much shorter, but usually they're pretty high, and so they're not. They're a little bit precarious, right? And I've seen some that are almost up chest high, so they can be quite big, and I think they tend to be big. Maybe some of them are only like 3 feet high. Yeah, Matt, go ahead.
I may have missed this at the beginning of your presentation, but they are the jars themselves, the inside, they're empty.
There have been remnants of grain found in 1 or 2 of them. Yeah, which is why
that helps support your idea.
Yeah, and that's why Albert Dean concludes, they're granaries. But again, that's 2 vessels out of 200. Oh, by the way, in Japan, there's been 600 of these things found. Although Japanese, sometimes there are some that are very similar in looks, and so it's not like the Chinese one where they're all unique. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Are they associated with a social class in the where they've been found? In other words, are they at the tombs of elites, or is this? As you talked, it seemed more and more to me that it sounded like the development of this and the crafting of it was a kind of popular piety that may have been more flexible with its ideas. And so is it a literate group of people who are crafting these? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and that's a really excellent question. And So these are landed families that have a great deal of wealth. And these were during the Wu State, these were the power brokers, right? And these are the guys who are running the state.
Just the opposite of what I was thinking.
Well, yes and no. I mean, also, I mean, all right, so we make this distinction between sort of elite religion and popular religion. And I think a lot of times it's just common religion. And that, you know, if you want to see what common beliefs are, often the emperors are the biggest purveyors of it. And the Confucian officials are, no, don't do that. That's wrong. And
Are
so
they only found in Buddhist places?
I would say that Buddhism is just coming into South China at this time. So I wouldn't call any of these places particularly Buddhist at this point.
But they wanted to depict,
Later, yeah, in the Western Gym and a little bit in the Wu, we start to see Buddhists, but it's not quite sure whether they're part of a Buddhist package or whether these were just decorative elements that looked sort of cool, and so they decided to put it on there.
Yeah.
But no, and so that's a really good question. But yeah, no, these are people who have a lot of money and power, and then they'll lose that power once the Northerners come down in force. And so then they'll become sort of a sub-elite. But still, these are people with money and connections.
Yeah, that's
and one problem with Chinese archaeology is that so much of it is salvage. It's oftentimes going for tombs, and actually big tombs are usually belong to the rich and powerful. And so you don't really get that much of a sense of what ordinary people believe or how they're buried. Yes, go ahead.
When the spout became stylized, was the opening closed when it became columns, and so you no longer had 5 openings?
Yeah, so
If it became a tower or whatever, it was covered closed.
yeah, so I think in the first part of the Wu State, we start to see that there's architectural elements, but they still have the spouts and they're still open. And I think after around 250, no, it just becomes that these are towers with tops, and the central one gets a roof. And so, so the spout thing, it's still there underneath, but it's no longer spouts. So the spouts go away. At the same time, though, the 5 link jars, they continue to be produced in the Wu State and the Western Jin. They're produced in less numbers, but they continue their existence. So even though the form is progressing, that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of residual pots that are still made in the old way as well. But just to muddy things and make it not very clear. But that's a great thing about scholarship, right? That there's a lot of mess, and you got to figure out what's probable rather than. And this period, the early medieval China, is renowned for being messy, right? Because the Northerners come in and control the Northern China, the Southern Chinese go and displace these Southerners who are already well in place, and it's just a mess. And so scholars of early medieval China are ones who really like a mess.
I actually have somebody from the UK, from Cambridge, asking, thank you, Professor Knapp, for today's awesome lecture. I may have missed it, but could you please expand on the significance of women figures on the jars? Also, are there any male figures or figures of children at all? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. My assumption is that they're basically, it's hard to determine who's male and who's female. And I think art historians are better prepared to state it. Oftentimes these figures are seen as barbarians, and sometimes they're acrobats. There's usually, I'm not going to reproduce it, but there's usually a guy who's standing on his head, and his legs are going up. And so I don't see, I can't really see that there are any women. And a lot of times these are seen as barbarians, not as Chinese. What was the second part of the question?
If there were any also male figures.
Male.
Male.
Yeah. Yeah, my presumption is they're male. If we go to South Korea and we go to the Silla Kingdom in this 5th and 6th century, there are female figures, and actually there's usually a couple having sex on the jar, which does not occur either on the Chinese or the Japanese ones. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. but yeah, there's nothing that I myself can definitely say is gender based on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, go ahead.
There was a figure of a mother holding a baby.
Yes. Oh, well, that's true. I forgot all about that. You're absolutely right. Yeah, so that would be sort of the only gendered one. Oops. Oh, and that's the back side. Let's get her front side. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I think this again is a woman with the infant. And here's the guy doing the, he's doing the headstand. So he's acrobat. Yeah, and maybe these are women too. I'm not sure. But yeah, this is obviously a woman. The other one was it was even clearer that it was a woman because you could see her breast. All right, the baby is sucking on the breast. And these guys seem to be worshiping her. Yeah, I'm not really sure. Yeah, they're really densely packed with stuff. And you're never quite sure what's going on. Any other questions?
No.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you so much.